Vampires vs. the Bronx is the latest Netflix horror movie to drop and was directed by Osmani Rodriguez. I was actually really excited for this movie. By the title and trailer alone, it evoked a feeling of nostalgia. The movie was seeming like it was going to be a callback to that period in the mid 90s when pretty much any horror movie would get made. They weren't meant to be taken all that seriously and are just a ton of fun to watch nowadays. Another reason I may have been a little too excited for this movie was that I actually really love vampire movies. No, not the soap opera kind that was popular 10 years ago, the actual vampire subgenre that is found in classic horror. The Lost Boys, 30 Days of Night, From Dusk Till Dawn, the first two Blade movies, Fright Night, both remake and original. These are all some of my favorite horror movies really ever. There is just something about the vampires that really make for terrifying villains in a horror movie. And since we've been flooded with self-serious, modernized horror movies over the past few years, something I'm not complaining about at all since there's been an overabundance of great horror throughout the past couple of years, I needed some variety. So a fun, sort of campy vampire movie was just the kind of horror flick that I needed. However, Vampires vs. the Bronx really didn't deliver. The movie as a whole just left me feeling underwhelmed. Not terrible by any means, but really lacking in any real substance or style. The movie is actually kind of weird of how bland it is. Each character, plot point, and aesthetic choice made in this movie is so lacking of any personality or depth that it's just left feeling functional. None of it's terrible or poorly made, but it feels like the bare minimum for a horror movie. The vampires aren't scary or interesting in any way. They feel like every other vampire. And in that way, they don't feel scary whatsoever. They just feel so stock and basic that they almost become a non-entity in the movie, just standing in as the generic bad guys. The movie's pacing is also really subpar. Not only is it way too short, not even clocking in at 90 minutes, the story is so rushed ahead that we barely get to spend any time with our characters, really. It never fleshed them out in any unique or cool ways. They were just stock characters. It just feels the exact same story beats of every other horror movie like this. It tries to shoehorn in a message about gentrification and community, but that is also such a non-presence in the story besides the mentioning a block party constantly. The movie's foundation is on such a weak script that it had to make up for that with visuals and style. And even then, it's severely lacking in that department. There was nothing about the movie that made it unique or memorable in any way visually, or thematically as well. The vampires looked so generic, there weren't any cool editing tricks or gimmicks that made these kinds of movies stand out. There weren't any outlandish characters that make the film fun. This movie didn't want to commit to that still silly yet still spooky style of horror that the premise/trailer evoked. It was too boring to be that. And if it actually was trying to be serious, there was way too many attempts at humor and more lighthearted moments for it to be taken seriously. Vampires vs. the Bronx has a major identity crisis going on, in that it doesn't have one. This movie is so devoid of personality, originality, or character that it ends up just being an empty husk. Just a very functional horror movie, which is a damn shame. I was really hoping this would be a fun-filled, heavily stylized horror movie that had a strong message behind it, and that just isn't really what we got. Compared this to, say, a movie like Tales from the Hood, that movie is funny, genuinely scary, and has some of the very distinct characters and interesting slash really great performances. It also subtly weaves its messages into each story while never being too on the nose or even going the other way with how this movie went and being a non-presence. It had that perfect balance of horror, message, and just being really entertaining. This movie just feels so empty and dull in comparison. The characters are all bland archetypes, the story is so basic a 3-year-old could have written it, and the message is so weak and vague that it ends up feeling really tacked on. Vampires vs. the Bronx may be one of the most disappointing movies to come out this year, wasting what could have been such a fun and entertaining movie that could have had a strong message behind it. Instead, we got this bland, lifeless snooze fest. Vampires vs. the Bronx gets a C. Guys, I do hope you enjoyed this review. Very bland, very forgettable horror movie. However, I am planning on, throughout the month of October, to cover a decent amount of horror movies, new and old. If you have any requests, please let me know. If there's anything you want to see me review, let you have at it in the comments. I will see you guys later.